this is the federal government's responsibility. They're trying to put it on the states, and we just can't handle it.
We nip and tuck here, and they find a little revenue here, find a little revenue there, make a cut here, hope that things are a little better than we expected, and then the state staggers on for another year.
Surprise, it's not good. It's not good for people, but it's also not good financially for the state.
And welcome to this episode of Lively. I'm Jim Hummel. I am joined this week by WPRI politics and business editor. Did I get that right?
You did. Well
Ted
done.
Nesi and Nancy Lavin, senior reporter for the Rhode Island Current. The state of Rhode Island got some short-term good news this week about its finances, but the long-term outlook is bleak in the wake of federal money likely drying up next year. Nancy, you had a great story about how what they call the one big beautiful bill, others have other names for it, about that's really the shoe that's going to drop come the new year. There's a huge ripple effect, and it's going to affect state finances.
Yes. So the state lawmakers, even before the federal budget cuts were signed in July, knew that this was coming down the pipe, required as part of the state budget that took effect July 1st that this whole group of state agency administrators and outside experts have all these working groups over the summer, lucky them, to analyze all of the different aspects of how federal budget cuts would affect Rhode Island. And so we got 3 reports spanning close to 300 pages on October 30th, the day before they were mandated to be due. And they really look at sort of overall revenue impacts and then a specific focus on like health and human services and a separate focus on tax changes. And surprise, it's not good. It's not good for people, but it's also not good financially for the state. Losing people on Medicaid or losing coverage for Medicaid through changes to eligibility and work requirements is going to shrink the federal funding that the states...
It's a pass-through, so it comes through the state and that dries up.
Similarly, as we've all heard in the news so much about SNAP, now SNAP has been... Hopefully, money is flowing again. We have full funding for SNAP for the year, but eligibility requirements are changing pretty drastically, and there's also some strict mandates around states reducing their error rates. That essentially the best way to do that is to make it much harder to be on food assistance, even if you qualify.
And right now, the state's error rate is so high for SNAP that the state's facing $51 million effectively penalty a year.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, all of us who covered the UHIP crisis, the whole point was to get a cleaner computer system for this stuff.
Right.
So it was notable to me that the state has one of the really bad error rates still.
Didn't SNAP, though, this whole SNAP situation show how much we rely on the federal government? Because they said it's $29 million, and the governor was quoted saying, we can't backfill. I mean, this is the federal government's responsibility. They're trying to put it on the states, and we just can't handle it beyond short-term crisis, right?
Well, the good thing, if there is a good thing, about most of these sort of more permanent federal really overhauls to the way that federal programs have worked for decades is that most of these changes don't actually start like January 1. There's 2027, 2028, 2029 even. There's something for the SNAP error rate called the Alaska exception because Alaska has
Lisa Murkowski.
Yes, exactly.
Because Alaska has such a bad error rate that basically, if your error rate is bad enough, you get a little more time to comply. So, there's a little bit of a strange incentive to be worse.
You get an extra couple of weeks for the term paper, right?
Exactly.
So what about this for the state's finances? Because the speaker, there was a lot of calls during the last session. We need to raise the tax on the higher income people, almost keeping that card because maybe he sees these storm clouds coming down the road.
Yeah, I mean, there's a part of me that sometimes I think we overcomplicate the budget discussion. It's in some ways very simple. The state has committed itself to a bunch of programs that grow at almost 4% a year with a revenue base that grows at 2.5. You don't really need all the details after that to know every single year you're going to be in the red.
a hole, right?
And then that leads to the whole January, we have a deficit. And then we nip and tuck here and they find a little revenue here, find a little revenue there, make a cut here, hope that things are a little better than we expected. And then the state staggers on for another year. And that's true of a lot of blue states that have committed themselves to a lot of health care and education spending that just grows faster than the rate of inflation, and therefore revenue can't keep up. That's just a permanent problem. Now, you add these federal changes, that's a new issue, but in some ways there's always some issue cropping up that's getting more expensive or some commitment.
But we're on such a thin margin,
Correct.
and they weren't expecting this. I mean, maybe the people behind the scenes were, but this is not something a year ago you were going to foresee.
No,
as a
not at
problem.
all.
And the federal COVID money's dried up, so now we're really in a pinch.
Right. And I think even though we have a better idea through these three reports about like the financial, there's still a lot of things that we're looking for federal guidance on. There is still the possibility, the thing that dragged the government shutdown on for 43 days, of the failure to extend these discounts for marketplace insurance but through the end of the year. That's going to have a big cost in Rhode Island, both for people being uninsured but also losing federal money. I mean, maybe between now and December 31st, Congress will do something to extend. That was, one of the provisions of ending the shutdown, is that they're at least going to have a vote on this, supposedly.
In the Senate.
Yes.
Well, the Republicans have been trying to get rid of what we've, colloquially referred to as Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, but there hasn't been a replacement. They don't like it because they think it's kind of socialized medicine, but they haven't been able to come up with a replacement, and it affects people in red states. You go to Louisiana and Mississippi, and they're like, you're going to take away my health insurance? What
And
are you
same
doing?
with SNAP. SNAP is
Right?
very important in red states too. And I think that's why we're not. This is. I think that's why you've seen the president's job approval rating falling, because he's now not on great ground for Republicans. Don't want to be talking about healthcare and SNAP. It's issues where they don't want to spend as much money as maybe the public wants, whereas they're much more comfortable on something like immigration, where the public is more hawkish and Trump does have more wiggle room, or the economy. Yes, not a great topic at the moment, maybe for the president, partly due to tariffs, but still something where Republicans feel better about their messaging. I mean, you had Marjorie Taylor Greene out there campaigning to keep the Obamacare subsidies, saying, look, I don't like Democrats, but people can't afford their health insurance.
Georgia,
In Georgia, we got to do something. I will say two things to keep in mind as we talk about this federal budget stuff. As Nancy said, a lot of it's staggered and things can change. So, if the Democrats were to win the House and bipartisan deals were needed more on spending stuff, you could see some of this stuff getting reversed, getting pushed out, being made easier. So it's not all set in stone forever. And then also, Right PAC's Mike DBA made a point to me over the summer when I interviewed him that the Medicaid cuts the federal government is doing are definitely harmful for the hospitals in Rhode Island, because they'll have less revenue. But, state spending on Medicaid, the biggest program in the budget, is linked to federal spending. Federal spending goes down, so does state spending. So this stuff is complicated. And so I just want to make sure we're not Chicken Little as reporters about it. We have to see how it all plays out. And as Nancy said, some of the federal guidance is not even in, so we can't even tell it's going to be implemented.
And so we will see what happens
Yeah.
come January when we get back in session. Okay. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Lively right here on Ocean State Media. Subscribe to us on YouTube and tell us what you think in the comments section below the video.